what led to the moratorium when it was around that privatisation of Telstra and why that was so important for the nation.
Well, we were blackmailed. I had to decide whether I gave up or the government gave up. We had to pay the price.
If Australia had begun more nuclear investment back then, not only in medicine but in the energy space, but how different do you think Australia's energy space would be now?
I took the view that if people were angry with me having gone back on never ever, they could vote against me in the election.
I heard you say in an interview, the only thing that's wrong with the GST is that it should have been higher.
Australia should be the Saudi Arabia of the Southern Hemisphere.
And in the process, of course, of making all of those resources available on the markets of the world, we have helped bring about one of the biggest reductions in poverty in the history of mankind. For many years, we maintained a white Australia policy which effectively excluded Chinese, Indians and others simply on the basis of, let's face it, colour. People are cranky with the major parties, particularly with the coalition. The most evil thing mankind has ever witnessed, I say that very deliberately, was the Holocaust. The Liberal Party is really conservative. No, it's not.
You're watching the JJ Podcast.
Well, John Howard, the 25th Prime Minister of Australia, you were in government from 1996 to 2007. Well, that was when you were Prime Minister. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I want to get straight into a topic with you. I was recently out at Lucas Heights, and that's why I thought, you know what, let's talk about nuclear.
Yes, please do.
But I want to start with the moratorium that was put on nuclear during your time in government or when you were Prime Minister. Just start off with what led to the moratorium when it was around that privatisation of Telstra and why that was so important for the nation.
Well, we were blackmailed, I can't put it any better than that, into prohibiting the establishment of a nuclear industry as the price of passing legislation effectively to renew the capacity to develop nuclear medicine. Now, Lucas Heights was the source of a lot of life-saving nuclear medicine. The Labor opposition at the time, because of their long-standing hostility to anything to do with nuclear, said we will not support it because you will use this at some time in the future to develop a nuclear industry. And we tried and we failed. And in the end, we had to go to the Democrats and the Greens. I think the Greens then had one or two, not many. And they agreed to support it in the Senate, provided we banned, for the duration of the legislation's effectiveness, the development of a nuclear industry in Australia. So that's the story. I didn't want to do that, but I had to decide whether I gave up, or the government I led gave up, the capacity to develop nuclear medicine, which I think would have been the wrong thing. And I just concluded, as did my colleagues, we had to pay the price. Now, I would love to see the current government change its mind, and if it did, I would encourage the opposition to support it. I don't think the government will, but in fact, I'm certain they won't, but that's the story.
We just mentioned Lucas Heights. I went out to the site a few weeks ago, and it was interesting because when we went on the tour, the gentleman said, this new nuclear power plant is thanks to the Howard government, and he told us a story that the team went to you and said, we need more money, we need 400 million to build this new power plant, and you said to them, I'll give you the money, but I want you to do something that is world leading and hasn't been done before. So if you can do that, here's your money. And now when you look at Lucas Heights, we are world leaders when it comes to nuclear medicine.
And we could develop a terrific domestic industry, but the law at the moment forbids us going further than Lucas Heights because it's associated with nuclear medicine. They're interdependent. It's a great facility and we should be very proud of it. We of course, performed well above our weight in nuclear. So I had people like Mark Oliphant and so forth. They were great.
Just going back to the decision with the moratorium, if Australia had begun more nuclear investment back then, not only in medicine but in the energy space, and I know it was not as topical 20 years ago as what it is now. It really wasn't. But how different do you think Australia's energy space would be now if that moratorium wasn't there?
It's one of those great hypotheticals. We weren't arguing for the development of a nuclear industry at that time. What we wanted was to renew the nuclear medicine capacity, and we could only do that by re-enfranchising Lucas Heights, and we had to get the support of the opposition to do that, and they wouldn't. And we turned to the Greens and the Democrats, and they said yes, but at a price.
I want to move on to GST. This was the introduction of GST fundamentally reshaped Australia's tax system. But the question that I have is, during your election, the campaign, and you said there's no way GST will ever be part of our policy. But then when you realised that it was the right thing to do, to push through and do it, as a leader, what gives you the confidence to know that, okay, during the campaign we might have said one thing because at the time that's what we felt was what we were going to do. But now in reality, when we're here in this moment, this is now the right thing to do. Just talk us through that, because I feel as though in today's political environment, it doesn't necessarily happen as much where someone might change their mind. And I think nuclear is a perfect example that the Albanese government should probably change their mind. But just tell us about what gives a leader the confidence.
Well, there was a history, Jaimie. I had argued for a GST for close to a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
I tried for a minor version of it when I was Treasurer in the Fraser government, but the then Prime Minister and the majority of the Cabinet knocked it back. I thought that was a mistake. I tried again when the Labor government was in power and Bob Hawke and Paul Keating called the tax summit. And Keating proposed, you may remember, it was called Option C, which was a 12.5% consumption tax or 12.5% GST. And I was the strongest supporter he had. I gave it more strong support than anybody on the Labor side. And in the end, the unions and Bob Hawke ganged up on Keating and said, no, you can't have it. And it fell by the wayside. And then, of course, John Hewson courageously put forward Fight Back, which was a very well-constructed economic proposal, and it knocked Bob Hawke for 6 politically. And he was replaced by Keating. And then Keating, having advocated the 12.5% GST or consumption tax, then turned on Hewson and I think outgunned and outdebated him in the campaign and got re-elected in the so-called but wrongly called unlosable election. Incidentally, there's no such thing known to politics,
I think certainly now,
man or woman, as an unlosable or an unwinnable election. Anything is losable if you have the wrong policy. Anything is winnable if you're superior to your opponent. What I did in a sort of fit of being emphatic, after I came back as opposition leader in the lead up to the 96 election campaign, I was asked about the GST and I said, that's off the agenda. Never ever. That was the phrase I used. Now, that was in fact before the campaign started. And we didn't campaign on it, that's true. But then I then decided, and along with my colleagues, particularly Peter Costello, the Treasurer, and others who strongly supported me in that endeavour, that we should move to having a GST. So we put together a very elaborate tax plan. And I took the view that if people were angry with me having gone back on never ever, they could vote against me in the election. And
it takes a lot of confidence to do what you did and to call an election a couple
brave, said, rather than confidence. But I thought it was a fair deal. It was a big change. We had a big majority, and there's one of the few lessons I learned in politics was that if you ever are lucky enough to have a big majority, you should use it because it'll disappear. So you might as well use it in a good cause. And we won very heavily in 96. We had a majority of about 44 out of a house of only 148. Now that's a big majority. And then we lost a lot of seats then, a lot of people who miracle wins, and we lost them. Some of them were very good, some of them probably thought they were a bit lucky to have won, but they were all good people. And but we put it up, and I remember saying very directly, if people hold it against me, because I said never ever, although there was a long history to it, I've always believed that we needed a broad-based indirect tax or GST. And when I said never ever, I really meant for the duration of the campaign. But anyway, I didn't say that. I mean, never ever means never ever. People then had a chance, and some people undoubtedly voted against me for that reason. But we managed to scramble back with a majority of I think 12 or 14. And we had magnificent candidates in marginal seats, particularly, but not only 3 women in South Australia, Christine Gallus, Trish Draper and Trish Worth, all of whom held marginal seats in Adelaide, and they hung on. And Jackie Kelly, very colourful candidate, one seat of Lindsay, she hung on, and Dana Vale and others, so great campaigners. No, we survived. We lived to tell another day. So I'm very happy with it but we need another big tax package. And I hope that the opposition has the courage to put something up. Because we rely too heavily on personal income tax for sources of revenue. Now, the GST help reduce that reliance for a time, but you have to keep building on it. You need...
One of the things I heard you say in an interview at the time, so you had gone from, as you say, never ever to a 10% GST, and then I heard you say in an interview, the only thing that's wrong with the GST is that it should have been higher. And I'm wondering now what you think, being 2026, that it never has become higher. Does it surprise you that government upon government, none of them have proposed to creep it up? And do you think that's a lack of confidence?
Well, it was a big fight to win it. To win that election was big. I mean, we sort of bound hand and foot. You couldn't change the rate of the GST without parliamentary approval and without the approval of all the states. And the net revenue from the GST all went to the states, still does. And they don't want to be heard to put their hand up for it. And you won't get a GST increase, or we wouldn't have got the GST accepted if it had been on its own. You have to have other things. I don't think people voted with any great enthusiasm for a GST, but they felt Australia needed a modern taxation system. And if the price of that was to include in that modern system a GST, then okay, they went along with it. That was the mood.
Yeah, well said.
When I look at GST, I see it as an example that, we've now had it for 20 years and talking about the controversy, I suppose you could say, when, it was a contentious policy. But is this a lesson for leaders that have come behind you to say, over time, a change can be accepted as normal. So take the risk and do something bold.
Look, I think that's very necessary. We need further reform of our tax system. We also need to unshackle our workplace relations system. Now, a lot of people say that was the reason we lost in 2007 work choices. I don't accept that. I think that was one of the elements. Some part of our work choices policy was unpopular and was a mistake politically. But in the end, people get tired of you. We've been in office for almost 12 years. I'd been Prime Minister the whole time. Alexander Downer have been foreign minister and Peter Costello treasurer. Now, those two blokes were terrific. And it was a very stable government. But stability can generate boredom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the end, I think people were saying, well, okay, this mob have been around for a while, let's try somebody else. And Rudd looked good, and they thought, oh, he's just a younger version than Howard. And anyway, I won't talk about that.
No.
I don't want to reflect upon my age
No.
by talking about his inexperience. To
No.
paraphrase something that Ronald Reagan famously said. He had a great sense of humour, Reagan. I admired him. He said he wouldn't. He was his opponent in one of the election campaigns. I think it was Walter Mondale, who said something came about age and experience, and he said, "Oh, I will not talk about my opponent's inexperience if he doesn't talk about my age." And everybody laughed. It was brilliant. He's
good.
like that.
I like that.
Just before we get off GST, I heard someone recently say that, as you just said, Jaimee, it's been 20 years. Someone recently said to me that they do believe GST should be higher, but that other forms of taxation, other taxes we have should be lower, especially to incentivise investment. So we've got a situation now where obviously productivity is dire.
Very low.
There was even an increase in inflation rates today. I mean, the situation of our economy is really, really scary.
We need to have further changes. I'm totally against further increases as the government is toying with. I hope they don't do it in capital gains tax. And as for negative gearing, whereby you can effectively have a small investment property, I know so many people who wouldn't in a month of Sundays regard themselves as wealthy.
Yeah.
But they're...
But happen to have an investment property, an apartment.
They bought a property and they borrow and use negative gearing to defray the interest with the rent. I mean, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, I believe in that. I believe in a society where you have, for want of a better expression, a lot of little capitalists. I believe in capitalism. I think it inspires people to take risks, to do productive things, and we should do everything we possibly can to encourage what I loosely call, and there is a better expression, but average Australians. Nothing average about any Australian.
No. Well, I want to talk about, we've mentioned the economy briefly, but right now Australia looks like it's really heading into a dire direction. Record levels of debt, low productivity. I don't believe there's any sort of vision in sight to fix it either. But we often hear online that Australia should be the Saudi Arabia of the Southern Hemisphere.
Well, I wouldn't like Australia to resemble Saudi Arabia when it comes to the treatment of women and domestic
as
violence.
in the
I mean, it's terrible.
resources.
We're talking resources.
Yeah,
Totally agree
not
with you.
the human rights, that side
No,
of
it's
things, but
pretty
about
fundamental.
the wealth of... So the Saudi Arabia, in terms of the resources and the wealth that they generate, that Australia should be...
And they pay hardly
like
any
that.
personal tax.
Yes, as a result. So we don't make enough on our resources. Can you explain to our listeners why that is?
One of the reasons why we're not fully benefiting from our resources is our, what I call, manic commitment to the politics of climate change. Australia has 38% of the world's easily recoverable uranium reserves. We have hundreds of years of coal and plenty of reserves of gas, yet we are steadily getting rid of them. I mean, I can remember when I first became Prime Minister and I had my very first meeting with Tony Blair after he was elected Prime Minister of Britain, and he was missionary in his zeal for climate change. And I said, I sort of went along with it. I was a bit reluctant. But he said, we're getting rid of all our uneconomic coal mines. And I understood all of that, sort of. I'm not sure that that's the right way to go anymore. become less enthusiastic
Yeah.
about climate change. I'm not sure that it makes sense for a country like Australia to put aside the benefits that Providence gave us with our resources in the name of joining the clamour for renewables. And in the process, of course, of making all of those resources available on the markets of the world, we have helped bring about one of the biggest reductions in poverty in the history of mankind. I can remember when I was a child, if I left anything on my plate, I'm sure I was not alone, my mother would say to me, "You finish that, don't you understand, you know, what children in," she would say, "China and India now." And she was right. I mean, she was teaching me a life's lesson. Be grateful for
What
The
you
fact
have.
that,
yeah, and we helped bring about change, particularly, but not only in China. China now is still a poor country compared with Australia, as is India, but not as poor as it was. And one of the reasons for that is that they have now available to them relatively cheap electricity.
Yeah.
now they're cheaper than Australia.
Yeah, especially China.
These nations now have
Yeah,
cheaper
I know,
electricity than we do.
electricity. What's helped fuel that? Australian resources. What are we trying to get rid of? Australian resources. It doesn't make sense. That's one of the problems the government's got. Now, I accept that in an ideal world when it's all happened and we've somehow or other thrown ourselves forward, renewables are cheap and available. I accept that. But you've got to get there.
Yeah.
And in the process of getting there, we could pay a very heavy price.
Absolutely. I was just going to say one of the things that will never cease to surprise me about the climate zealots that so desperately want to reduce emissions, not only in Australia but globally. They want to, you need nuclear and uranium to get there. There are countries, 41 countries now have signed up to be using or investing in nuclear energy. We've got uranium, but in like WA, they won't let us, they don't want to mine it and export it.
Oh, no, that's crazy. Crazy stuff.
Mr. Howard, I want to talk about a topic at the moment that is making headlines for not the best way.
No.
And that is social cohesion.
Yeah.
And you've spoken previously about the importance of social cohesion and shared values, and we're known for the phrase of "we will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come."
Yeah, that's what I said, and I believe it. It
Yes.
summarises my attitude to migration.
Yeah.
I believe migration has been wonderful for Australia.
Yes.
It still is. But it's got to meet those criteria. We have an absolute right to decide who comes to Australia. That right was disputed by a lot of people when we stopped the Tampa coming to Australia and when we brought in on the eve of as it happened by circumstance, the eve of the 2001 election, what was called the Pacific Solution. What we were really saying to the world was we will continue to take migrants. And if you look at Australia's history, on a per capita basis, Australia took more Vietnamese refugees and boat people than any country in the world. Far more on a per capita basis. America may have taken more in aggregate, but given America's got a population of 330
Hundreds of
million,
millions of people.
Yeah.
and we have a population of 27, it's proportions that count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you apply the proportions, we're way ahead of anybody. And gee, haven't they settled well? Did you hear any talk now about Cabramatta? No.
No.
It's worked well. And it was, I think, somebody who was either one of those or senator those who won the seat of Fowler as an independent,
Yep.
Daly. And she defeated the nominated Labor candidate in a seat that historically had always been Labor. Now that was a great effort. It was a great demonstration of Australian tolerance. I mean, we often put up with lectures from people that we're not tolerant. We are. And we do pay as we see.
Absolutely.
And if people are good and good citizens, we'll support them. Now, I think we have a perfect right and we should continue to exercise that right. to decide the circumstances in which people come. And when you look at migration in Australia, it's been very successful. For many years, we maintained a White Australia policy, which effectively excluded Chinese, Indians and others simply on the basis of, let's face it, colour. That was the basis of it. I mean, it was described otherwise, but... And then over time that altered, and we saw the folly and the moral shortfall of that. And it was really effectively changed by Harold Holt, the Liberal Prime Minister who followed Menzies. But Holt was very strongly supported by Gough Whitlam, who became Labor Prime Minister only a few years later. So it became bipartisan, although there remained people in both parties, particularly the Labor Party, who continued to oppose it. But we now have a situation where in the last probably 3 or 4 years...
2 million people. 2 million people have come in the last...
but of those, the largest source countries in order are India, China, Great Britain / Ireland, in that now. I mean, years ago, a great bulk of migrants came from, well, they did from the beginning of time, they came from the cities and various parts of England and Scotland and Ireland. And then later on, we of course took very large numbers from the Baltic countries. You now have 2 premiers of Australia. Malinauskas is, I think, from Latvia. And Crisafulli, I think his ancestors may have been Italian cane growers in North Queensland. It's all good. I mean, we should... We've still got plenty of Anglo-Irish names as well, but so what? I mean, it's all good. People who say we don't do these things, they don't understand the history of this country.
Yeah.
And that's all been accepted. And does anybody have any problem in voting for somebody who's not a Smith or a Kelly or a McDonald? No. They just want to know what the person...
That's just identity politics.
Well, it is, and it's... We rejected it years ago, and I resent attempts to try and bring it back.
Totally. I just want to ask a question. You've mentioned, obviously, that you were famous for that statement on how we decide who comes in this country and the circumstances in which they come. I was quite shocked to listen to an interview in December with a former immigration minister, Philip Ruddock, I think it was, with the SBS, where he was basically saying if he were to advise the Liberal Party now as they develop an immigration policy to put forward, that he thinks they've got to be very careful that they don't discriminate on culture and religion. And when I heard him say that, I thought, I think they're the very things that we probably should be discriminating on, keep speaking of social cohesion, as Jaimee has just said. How important do you think that is?
Well, I do think if people find themselves unable to support the common values of this country, they're not welcome. Now, what are those common values? Well, support for parliamentary democracy, a free press, equal treatment of men and women. I mean, it's very important.
Yes, it is.
A lot of people come from countries that don't treat women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about it enough. I mean, this country gave equal voting rights to women before Federation.
Yeah.
I think it was in South Australia. And do most people know that? No.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, we pioneered a lot of voting reforms. We were the first country that really promoted the secret ballot, which was designed to sort of protect employees against intimidation by employers. But I think, and having a free, open society, and having freedom of religion, not only respect for the traditions of all religions, and bearing in mind that the moral code of this country is built on the Judeo-Christian ethic. That's a fact of life.
Yeah.
Now, some people may not like that, but I try and deal with what's reality. And that is, I mean, it's a tradition that I think has served this country well, but it's a very significant tradition. And if people despise that, I don't know that they should be allowed. Now, how you weed them out and apply it is sometimes difficult. But I don't regard now, I don't know precise context in which Philip Ruddock cautioned about it, but I think probably nobody wants a policy that says Muslims are not welcome or
No.
Jews are not welcome. No, you know what,
No, I don't think anyone wants
I
that.
don't think anybody wants that. What we want is a policy that says people who won't sign up to fundamental Australian values are not welcome. Then they're not.
I wanted to get your take on some recent polling that's happening at the moment. One Nation overtaking the coalition for the first time ever. Tell us about what your thoughts have been on the rise of One Nation at the same time the coalition is going in the other direction.
Well, I've certainly seen that polling, and it is polling. And Malcolm Fraser had a well-known saying, there's only one poll that counts, and that's the one on polling day. But no politician worth his or her salt seriously says with a straight face, I completely ignore polling.
Yeah.
We all are interested. I think One Nation's done better because people are cranky with the major parties, particularly with the coalition, and we have not been very united. And there's a simplicity about the appeal of One Nation. It's anti-everything, but I'm not sure it's so pro-anything.
Yeah.
And in the end, you have to stand for things, otherwise you'll fall for anything. And there's an element of that in it, but I don't think the coalition should ignore the peeling away of its vote in these opinion polls. No, it can't. And I am a long believer in the coalition of the Liberal Party and the National Party. It used to be the Country Party. I remember when Menzies retired after having been Prime Minister of Australia from 1949 until early 1966. He was asked what were his greatest achievements, and he said, one of my great achievements was the coalition of the Liberal Party and the Country Party. And I think of his close relationship with Arthur Fadden and with John McEwen. I think of Fraser and Doug Anthony. And I worked with three magnificent National Party leaders, the late Tim Fisher, John Anderson and Mark Vaile. Now, I still see a great deal of John. I mean, Tim's no longer with us, and but John and I had very similar views on most issues. And the Country Party now is not quite as protectionist as it used to be. I mean, it's not for me to tell people how to run the affairs of the two parties now. I'm long out of it. But I just would, broadly speaking, encourage them to look back in history and conclude, as you must, that whenever they've worked together in coalition, they've not only been politically successful, but more importantly, they've done good things for Australia.
For the country, absolutely. That's where I'm just so upset at the moment as a member of the voting public.
Well,
we need them to be performing better.
I mean, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the way in which, and rightly so, in which present government and the present Prime Minister failed to respond effectively to the wave of anti-Semitism that came after, not Bondi, that was in a sense
after October 7.
But after 7th of October 2023. If Mr Albanese had then got in touch with Peter Dutton, the leader of the coalition then, and said, let's do a joint news conference, that would have had a big effect.
Yeah,
it would have been huge.
And it would have created a climate of sympathy for the Jewish community. And let's remember that the most evil thing mankind has ever witnessed, I say that very deliberately, was the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean, never before had any political ideology, nation, tried to totally destroy a race. Now, we hear a lot of talk about genocide. That was genocide.
It was, yeah.
As was the terrible deeds of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. And it was on a more industrial scale, I suppose, Nazis because of who they were. And it was backed by a massive war machine, but it was terrible. And the number of Jews who died on the 7th of October 2023 was the largest number in a single event since the Holocaust.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. I don't think we denounced it enough. I think if moral leadership and clarity had been demonstrated then, I'm not saying that murders wouldn't have occurred. Nobody can say that. But what you can say is that there would have been a different climate. And a lot of people who are disposed to casual bigotry and anti-Semitism saw all of that as a bit of a wink and a nod or a green light. I'm not saying deliberately, but that's how they interpret it.
I know we have to wrap up soon. I would be kicking myself if we didn't ask about the Broad Church. So you've been so well known for saying that the coalition was always a broad church and was able to bring to the table different thoughts and opinions, and in the party room things were nutted out. I'm sure it wasn't always everyone in agreement. Now, though, we see on our socials and hear from the public directly that they think that broad church is too broad, that the feelings about policy and thoughts about how to run the country are too extreme. Do you agree with that, or do you think that it can be pulled together? Is it more extreme now than it was?
No, I do not agree that the broad church is less relevant. What I mean by that is that in a whole range of areas you can have a breadth of policy. I mean, I am typically, was as Prime Minister, I suppose, I had a socially conservative position. What a lot of people would call. I mean, I, for example, strongly supported the maintenance of the monarchy because I thought it worked better. Some of my senior colleagues didn't. I mean, when we had the vote on the Republic, Peter Costello, Robert Hill and Richard Alston advocated a yes vote. I advocated a no vote. I mean, fair enough. I voted, it was a pretty rum plebiscite. I voted for better or for worse, I voted no to the same-sex marriage plebiscite because I felt that I'm not I think people are entitled to love whoever they want to. And I certainly don't want to see a return to the old bigotry days against homosexuality. But I do think that traditional marriage adds an element of stability, not that it suits everybody. And I generally, on a lot of those issues, I had fairly conservative views. Whenever we had a moral issue in the Parliament, when I was Prime Minister, I'd always advocated. I mean, for example, stem cell research and euthanasia, I advocated a free vote, and I always voted on the more conservative side. And a lot of my colleagues did, some didn't, but it didn't affect them. Now, on economic policy, I had a very strong small L liberal view that you got to get the government the heck out of the way, and the government
don't compete against the private sector.
No. Let people take risks, and I think you've now got a government that's advocating made in Australia policy. Well, that's just a licence to pick winners, and governments are very bad at picking winners. They usually pick losers, and one of the great assets of a free market is that it sorts out the wheat from the chaff, the good from the bad, the successful from the failures. So I think you've got to have a philosophy that says, I speak of the Liberal Party, that embraces all those views. I mean, I sometimes hear people say, the Liberal Party is really conservative. No, it's not. It's liberal in the classical sense. And these words mean different things in different countries. In America, the word liberal means left wing.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
We've always got to make sure we don't say that to the
and
wrong
in
people.
Canada, the dominant centre-left party is the Liberal Party. The current Mark Carney's a Liberal. And I dealt with a lot of Liberal. I mean, I was very close to Jean Chrétien, who was a French-Canadian. He was a Liberal, but also later Stephen Harper, who was Conservative. And in Britain, of course, the Liberal Party virtually doesn't exist anymore. It was very dominant, and its traditions were responsible for a lot of the social improvements. People like Lloyd George and prior to him Gladstone, they were Liberals. The Conservatives, the Tories, were more sort of associated with the landed gentry. Now, we include those people. I mean, not that we have many landed gentry, but look, what you do in politics is you have your base, people who always will support you, because instinctively there are a section of the Australian population that sees itself as centre-right, conservative, whatever, and they support us. Although we're getting down to the bare bones of that, and that's bad. And there should be a message. And I think it's a cry from the heart from a lot of people, these opinion polls. I don't think they're an expression of support for Pauline Hanson. I think they're a cry from the heart. Stop abandoning us. Stop flirting with people other than us. Build your way back by starting with us and adding to it with sensible policy. But I think we can reverse those poll trends by putting aside open manifestations of disunity and also developing and articulating policy. Now, we've talked in general terms about immigration. We've got to be more specific. We've got to say, this is what we would aim and these are the principles. And I think if you do that, people will give us a tick. Because the population as a whole, whether you vote Labor, Liberal, National Party or Pauline Hanson or Green or whatever, want us to decide who comes to this country.
Yeah.
And they've seen migration, they've seen it work. I mean, I just think I grew up in a suburb of Elwood, which everybody was, to use the phrase I used a moment ago, was a Smith, a Kelly or McDonald. Now, of course, went through successive migration of Greek people, then Vietnamese, Korean, they're all terrific. It's all work too.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. John Howard, thank you so much for your time today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the JJ Podcast.